Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival, SIF Speaks, sponsored by Wayside Furniture. I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Aaron Spears. And Aaron, there are a number of films at this year's festival that focus on music, but the documentary we'll discuss on this edition of SIF Speaks takes the music film genre to a whole other level.
I would certainly say so, Dee. In Sirens, we get to meet the members of Lebanon's first and only all-female thrash metal band. It is a really fascinating look at a musical group as a band that is evolving while at the same time the society around them is kind of thrashing in its own way.
Yeah, joining us now is the director, producer, and cinematographer of Sirens, Rita Baghdadi.
So Rita, the first question, since you've made this documentary about Slave to Sirens, was how did you first connect with them? How did you discover them as a band?
I discovered them through their music online. It was in 2018. I think it was June, or it might have been a little bit earlier than June. But basically, the film kind of happened really organically because of a lot of things that happened in my life at that moment. But one of the things is just, plain and simple. I grew up listening to, punk and hardcore. So I was never a metalhead, but I always loved heavy music. And I'm also just always looking for new music because music is a big inspiration for my work as a filmmaker. I wasn't like actively searching for a band to make a movie about. But when I saw this little art, they had just come out with their EP, which is like 4 songs. And so they had a little bit of press going on. And I saw this article about them, a couple articles floating around. And, with it was this image of them, 5 young women standing in a, forest in Lebanon wearing all black. And, they all had this giant hair. And I just remember, Leela was standing off to the side and, had her arms crossed. It was very angsty. And I don't know, I something about the image struck me. And then I went and listened to their EP on Spotify and I was really blown away by their talent. And I feel like now what I was responding to is I could really feel what they had been through kind of in their music. Like it was sort of, their way of expressing themselves, which sounds obvious, but, I think when you watch the movie, you really just feel that. So that's really what started it off. I contacted the band on Facebook and just wanted to connect with them and just be like, you guys are really amazing. Again, wasn't like immediately thinking about a movie, although it's always kind of in the back of my mind. And Leelis was the one to answer on Facebook. And we just started, started a friendship online, and we just like Skyped for hours and connected about a lot of different things. And so the other side of that story, which is much sort of more personal, is it was around the time when my dad had been diagnosed with a brain disease a little bit before that. And I was grappling with the thought of losing him. And, my dad's, my Moroccan side, my Arab side, he's from Morocco. So I was kind of, as you grow older and you start to think about like where you come from and what that means and all these things and your identity. And so thinking about losing my dad, I think I was really trying to forge my own connections with the Arab world, like outside of my family, because it really had been my family for most of my life. And so, when I met Leelas, I think I just really connected with her on a personal level and I saw like a sort of a younger version of myself in her, So that was a really powerful moment for me. And I think that's ultimately what really led me to make the film is because, and I'm probably answering more than your first question now, but
that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, we can keep going. But basically, I grew up in post 9/11 America as an Arab American person. And so the stereotypes and the images and the demonization of Arab people on screen and in media, was like deeply damaging to me. And I resented it growing up. I think that there just hasn't been enough complex portrayals, of Arab people, especially, or just people from the Middle East, people from the region. It's been so monolithic and so negative. It's always about terrorism. It's always about war. It's always about, it's always trauma porn. It's like, they're just, I just felt like there just needed to be more complex portrayals, especially of women. And so all these things converged, and that's kind of what led to Sirens.
And you've touched on the connection that you made with Lilas, but you show the whole band on stage and in rehearsals. And then you mainly focus on Lilas and Sherry, the guitarists and co-leaders. And I was, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, did she film everyone and then decide these were the two stories? Or was it some other choice you made in the filming process to feature these two mainly?
That's exactly it. I filmed everyone, and but it was maybe about a year into filming, which was maybe like my third trip or something, that the sort of origin story of the band really came out. I mean, I understood how they met and everything, but I didn't know the details until maybe about a year in, and that struck me as something that was unresolved. And in the way that I saw, was witnessing them interacting with each other, and sort of there's the playfulness and the sort of this unresolved anger towards one another. And like, I just, I was struggling to understand it for a while, and I would, ask questions, but nothing really led to answers until I sort of really understood their backstory. And that, I think, in my mind, while I was filming, shifted, okay, maybe this film is about the two of them. But I didn't plan, like, I still forged ahead with filming the other members because they were interesting and I wanted to get to know them more. And like, for example, Maya, the vocalist, I have a lot of scenes with her on the cutting room floor. And I, for a long time, thought she would still be in the film more, even right up into the edit. But when we did the edit, it just became clear, sometimes you don't know what the film can contain until you really put it in. And so it wasn't until the edit, actually, that we decided, me and my editor and a couple other people on my team, what is the best movie out of all this footage, and that was the best film. So
I wanted to ask, since you shot the film on location where the band is at in Beirut, Lebanon, there's a lot of great texture that you add in that's just what's going on as life in Lebanon. There's demonstrations, there's even the massive and tragic port explosion in 2020 that's in your film there. What kind of an atmosphere was that as the filmmaker, and did that affect how you were filming, or even like locations you could or couldn't go to or feel safe filming, or did you just kind of go wherever the band was going to take you?
Yeah, I mean, as a rule, I sort of go wherever the band goes, and try to just live it, so to speak, as they live it. And I do that with all my films. I mean, I've been in other, tricky situations, and I really just kind of put my not that my life is their responsibility, but sort of, so to speak, put my life in their hands, okay, whatever you're experiencing, I'm going to experience it with you, which is like, maybe, I don't know, it's neither here nor there. But with the situation in Lebanon, I mean, it was kind of a slow burn, to be honest. Like, I got there in a relatively, quiet period in 2018. Or they had been going through a relatively quiet period, the girls. And then, but soon after I started filming, that's when the sort of economic collapse was happening. And capital control didn't happen until a little bit later, but the country was severely having issues. And so that's what led to the revolution, is because the tax on the country wanted to tax WhatsApp. And basically the people of Lebanon said no. And that's when the revolution started. And the revolution at the beginning in 2019 was really hopeful. I mean, it was a really hopeful moment. And so to be there witnessing that was incredible. And then it started to turn, then there was like capital control, and then the revolution started to turn violent. And, there was talk of like people, political groups planting, individuals in the protest to make it violent so that it would seem like it was this way, which happens a lot. But, that's when things started to get a little tricky in terms of navigating. There was one time I was scheduled to be in Lebanon to film, and I had already gotten to the Doha airport in Qatar, and I usually fly through Doha, and so that's already a 16-hour flight that I took. And so I get there, and it's in the morning. I think I don't call anyone. Sherry calls me, and she's like, "Rita, you shouldn't come." And I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm on my way. I'm already here." And she's like, "It's just she's like, the situation is too, scary. It's too unpredictable. Like, I don't think it's smart for you to come." Because also throughout Lebanon, throughout the last few decades, like the first thing to close is like the airport, or the first thing to get taken over is like the airport. So you just can't leave. And in fact, that was happening all throughout the protests and the revolution, is that they were, people would block the roads and the streets to major parts of the city. And so, yeah, there was that threat. And I thought about it for like I hung up. I thought about it for like 5 minutes, and I was like, I should take this seriously, because she, she wouldn't say it unless she meant it. And I thought about it for 5 minutes, and I was like, no, screw that. I was like, anything that they're going to go through, I'm going to go through with them. So I ended up going on that trip, and it was fine. The explosion, I was supposed to be there during the explosion. I was scheduled to fly there, I think 4 days before. Mm-hmm. And where I stay is right behind the port, actually, in Mar Mikhail area. And in fact, the apartment that I usually stay in, it's like a group of apartments that I would rent each time, and it got destroyed in the explosion. So like, who knows if I had been there. But out of some random circumstance, I had pushed my flight back like a week. So I ended up only getting there a couple days after it happened. And I kept that same flight, again. And I was like, well, A, what are the possibilities of this happening again? So like, I'm just going to go, but B, like, whatever they're going through, I want to go through it with them. So that's how it all happened.
And meanwhile, the young women enslaved to Sirens are still making music. I mean, I was really impressed with what talented musicians they are. They've chosen to play a genre of music that's not popular to most people in their community. And I wanted to find out what you learned from them about why that was their musical choice.
I think each of the young women got into metal in a different way, but I think by and large, it's a sort of a pure raw form of expressing anger and frustration. And I mean, with Leela specifically, her origin story of metal is kind of like, or let's say heavier music, which later turned into metal, was she actually just discovered a CD we almost put this story in the movie, but it just didn't really fit somehow. But her dad had bought a, CD player, and they didn't have internet, like, for a long time. Like, she didn't grow up with internet like most people her age did. And even like, electricity was spotty. So her dad had bought the CD player, brought it home. In the player is Evanescence, or it was like a compilation CD. And the one song that she heard that really struck her was Evanescence. And she just remembers the distortion of the guitars. And like, she hadn't heard that music before, because it was a lot of, Arabic music and, love songs. And I think, she had heard rap and hip hop and stuff, but this like sort of distortion really struck her. And then hearing a female vocalist, like singing, like screaming, singing heavy, and like, expressing things, she just hadn't heard it before. So that really was her, vehicle of choice after that for self-expression. And I think it's true for all the young women.
When you also make great use of the band's music to highlight the dramatic moments in the film. But I wanted to ask also about Para One, who you have on doing the composition and like the scoring for the film. he's worked with was it Celine Sciamma out of France before,
Yep.
and seeing that credit ahead of time, then watching your movie, I was like, I don't know what kind of score is going to be going on because it's very different than what he's been doing in other films that I've seen. So could you talk about kind of the mix used of the band's music and then also making an original composition to go with your documentary as well?
Yeah, yeah. I actually like Parowan was my first and only choice. Kind of like I because I'm in love with Celine Sciamma's work, and I knew, I wanted to make a coming of age movie, like the genre,
Oh
even though
yeah, yeah,
older, but I wanted to make that genre of film. And Celine's films are very much coming of age films.
yeah.
And I loved, Parowan's talent and his style. So I contacted him and he agreed, he agreed to do it. And I was like, this is incredible. It's such a dream. But yeah, I didn't know like how it was going to work out exactly. I knew that I was temping the film with some of like there was a track from Girlhood, which is Celine's
Mhm.
film, in there that he wrote. And so I knew that the temp was working, but you kind of have to throw away the temp and like forget about it because you can't just recreate the same song over again. But when he started, yeah, it was clear. It was like he even said, he's like, this is something I'm very comfortable with. Like this,
Okay.
he knew the movie was meant for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken it on. But yeah, I always knew I wasn't gonna like score the movie with the girls' music because I thought that would, I don't know, somehow I thought it would be like do a disservice. I wanted to keep the music in the live moments,
Gotcha.
Oh yeah.
yeah, and so all their music is live, because I wanted to highlight their talent. I didn't just
Right.
want to slap a produced song, of theirs over the footage and be like, and this is their band's music. I don't know. It didn't feel right to me. And I also wanted to juxtapose the heaviness of the music and what they were going through, which is why like a lot of the country moments, we call them, is sort of scored by their music, but it's live, it's being played live, because that's the anger and the frustration and the
Right.
raw expression, and then the sweeter moments of their lives in between, and together, and just being young women, and goofy or whatever. That's Parowan's score, because that's what he does really well. And
Right.
yeah, so working with him was such a dream. I can't wait to work with him again. He's
Oh, cool.
the sweetest, most, he's just got no ego. It's like he's just a lovely, lovely person to work with.
Well, I want to talk because the music captures emotions that the young women aren't comfortable perhaps expressing in real life conversations. And that being said, there are some really emotional exchanges between the band members that I don't want to give away the content of, but I am curious about the filming process. I mean, did you get surprised by how some events were unfolding in front of you? And were there times that you wished you had more cameras to cover?
Yes, there was definitely times where I wish I had more cameras. But I also don't think we would have made the same movie if there were more cameras. It was a
Yeah.
very intimate experience on all sides. So it was what it was, and that's why it ended up what it is. And that's the beauty of documentary. I think I love that challenge, and just the in the momentness of it. But yeah, I mean, for example, like the band fight, which is what you probably didn't want to give away, but they I I think only in later, that scene is like a 4-hour scene or something. Like it goes to night, like in the footage. Like we were there
Yeah.
Yeah.
all afternoon into the evening, and so what you see is a very small sliver
Mm.
of that moment. But the reason it is what it is because I watching it later, it's actually one of the first scenes we cut in the film, like in the post process, because I knew that you go right for like, okay, where's the emotion, like what's the moment, right? And I watching it back after knowing after getting to know the girls, spending all this time and knowing what I knew about the backstory, I all of a sudden saw all the subtext in the scene that I hadn't noticed before. So yeah, it's like when you say, was it surprising the way it was unfolding? It's like, I think it not in the moment. In the moment, I was just, I was worried about getting the right coverage and being one camera in the room. But also, you're kind of like, okay, this is they're fighting. It's like, this is where it all gets laid out on the table. But I really didn't understand, all the things that Sherry was saying. I didn't understand it until we got into the edit. And I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense.
Well, I wanted to ask too, also because you serve as cinematographer as well, there are also some, I guess we could say, prickly exchanges between Lelis and her mother that are very intimate. And as a viewer watching it, it was one of those, like, it makes you kind of like uncomfortable how voyeuristically we're like, this feels like such an intimate thing that maybe we shouldn't be watching. How do you as a documentarian get people so comfortable to have exchanges like that when there's a camera right there filming them?
It's such a funny question because I don't even know how to answer it. I've been asked this before, and I think it starts with, I'll try to answer it. I think it starts with, being a trustworthy person, which sounds, again, obvious or like really gigantic, but like, I do think when you are a trustworthy human, other people will, if you prove that you're a trustworthy, sure, then, other people will reciprocate unless they're a terrible person. But like, I think it's just, trust reciprocates trust. So there's that, and that's kind of just how I live my life, let alone make films. But then there's enough time spent off camera. Me and Lelis built up a foundation even before I got to Lebanon, let alone even before I started rolling cameras. I mean, I was like, I lived with her for the first week of the shoot and like slept in her house. And, so we had sort of a very intimate thing right from the beginning. And with Jumana, Lelis's mom, I think it was less immediate. She wasn't like dying to be on camera necessarily, but I think there was an element of like wanting to have a witness there, wanting to be seen, wanting things to be seen by someone else. Because I think that, again, it's like with Lelis and Sherry, with Lelis and her mom, there was sort of things that were unresolved, and there was a lot of tension all the time, and I was feeling it and witnessing it, and so I knew that I needed to get that on camera because I also wanted the audience to understand who Lelis was and where she was coming from, and what made her angry, and it's the country, and it's this and it's that, and it's any restrictions placed on who she wants to be in life. And so I don't know, I think in those moments also, it's so close to the surface that it can't help but come out, and whether there's a camera there or not. And once you've built that foundation of being like, I'm a friend, I'm trustworthy, I'm here to witness this with you, the camera isn't a barrier anymore. It's just like a part of my body, and I'm just in the room with them, and yeah.
Yeah. We've asked that question of a few documentarians that we've interviewed, and it's kind of fascinating to me how what you've said has been like the echo that most everybody else has said too. Another documentarian also mentioned, like, you just have to be, like you said, a good trustworthy person, but also like a deep listener, and like the ability to just be there and be present, because some people just are aware that this document is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do think there's an awareness, but ultimately that's not a bad thing, because if you as an audience member were sitting, if it wasn't on the screen, if you were sitting in the room, there would also be an awareness.
Right.
Right. Speaking of awareness, the film gives a strong sense of the instability in Lebanon at the point you were filming. And I wanted to talk about why you chose to illustrate it, well, really, throughout the whole film, with quick shots, quick edits, and music, as opposed to the historical on-screen graphics or voiceovers.
Well, I mean, stylistically, I knew I wanted to make a film, that was more experiential and immersive and intimate and poetic rather than educational, didactic, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I wasn't going to explain the history of Lebanon because there just was no way to do that organically. It's not something Leela was going to say, so I kind of ruled that out from the very beginning. I wanted and I also went into making this film really adamant that I didn't want to make a film about all the bad things happening in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really a tricky dance in the edit to be like, well, we don't want to just highlight all the bad things happening in Lebanon, but these are the things happening in Lebanon.
Right.
Well, I really felt, me and my editor, who's Lebanese, we felt torn, like how do we portray this accurately, but also while not taking over the storyline, not overshadowing the story of the girls and their ambitions and their,
right.
Just coming of age, sort of, so to speak. And so that's kind of how, it happened organically. Again, it's like, well, what's this moment and why are we showing it? And it's like, we juxtapose the revolution getting violent with like, Sherry's kind of growing anger and everything bubbling to the surface, between the band. And the reason why I put the explosion in the film really was, again, not a light decision. For a long time, we were like, we're not using this. Like, we don't want to, there's no reason to show it. It's too traumatic. It's too this or that. But I felt like in making a coming of age story, I had a responsibility to show, again, what the girls were going through.
Mm-hmm.
And that moment that the explosion happened, I still have the voice note that Leela sent me, which is so haunting. It was a clear loss of innocence. Like it was a point of no return. Like that was it for her. Like I saw her change as a person from that moment forward. So I felt, okay, if I'm actually bearing witness to this woman's life, and this moment in her life, I should say, then that's a very big moment. And from the very beginning, me and my editor were like, we're only using stuff about the country, as a context for what the girls are going through and as a way of everything needs to move through them and their experience, so it can't just be like, like cut to news clip and here's this happening over here, but it has nothing to do with the band. So that's kind of why we came to this decision.
And I gotta say, I really liked that approach because as we're meeting the members of the band, we're also meeting the environment that they grew up in, but organically in a way where you're just standing somewhere and something starts to happen. And then now you experience that and you're somewhere else. It keeps the viewer off balance, but in a good way, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that too. There's even that scene where it was this amazing like bonding moment where she's saying like, "Oh, I got a couple numbers last night because I was out," and she's like, "Oh, let me see." And then they're like sharing phones, like as people do when like that sort of thing happens in life. But meanwhile, around them, like the protests start growing, and then it like passes and then sweeps them up as well. Yeah, it all felt totally organic to me. I think you made absolutely the right decision by keeping that in or by including that for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, that's another scene where like as I was filming it, I don't think I realized how crazy, like how insane is that, or how like what a coincidental moment. I don't think I realized the edit, and I was like watching it. It's like a one take,
Yeah.
You're standing there for maybe 25 minutes or something, and I was just rolling for the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
In the edit, we had to cut in because it's too long, but like it really just could have been one take. And it's one of those shots that will, sort of defines the movie. I think when I shot that, and a lot of people ask me, how did you know you were done? Like, how did you know you're done shooting?
Sure.
Like, and I think that scene is what did it for me, because all the themes in the film, everything came full circle. Like everything kind of connected at that moment.
Well, I wanted to ask actually a quick preface question, because I know you've taught some documentary classes as well. But as you were talking about finding like in the editing, discovering these moments that you're like, oh, I didn't realize I captured that when I was there. Were there other documentaries that you looked to for inspiration, either like as you were prepping the film or maybe like as you were editing and finding the narrative in your footage?
I don't remember if in the edit we had any films that we were modeling. I don't think there really was anything in the edit, because by the time we got to the edit, we were like, you sort of have to throw away everything that you thought you were making, and you just focus on what you actually captured, what is actually happening behind the lens.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what your movie is. And you don't get to make it anything other than what it is, because that's when you force it, and that's when it feels fake and, not very good. So by the time we got into the edit, it was like, all right, throw away everything you thought you knew, and let's just look at the footage. But before that, there's one film that I just love, and it kind of swirled around in my head as I was conceptualizing the film, and like the early days of shooting it was All These Sleepless Nights. And it's a Polish film about, young early 20s ravers in Poland, and just like two friends who are like going out and they rave, and they're trying to find love and meaning, and amidst the party scene, and the backdrop is like Warsaw, but like, and you don't see any craziness happening in Warsaw, but you feel the history of everything that's happened there. And this is a new generation. And so I really wanted that for Sirens. I wanted it to be, why can't we just have a coming of age story in the Middle East that doesn't have to do with war? That's like, why can't they just be playing metal shows and having fun and like finding love? Well, again, you have to throw away everything you think because look what happened. I mean, the revolution and economic collapse and the explosion and the pandemic and like all these things that like I couldn't control. So I couldn't make All These Sleepless Nights, but I had it in my mind and all along. Yeah.
Well, then speaking to your documentary teaching, are there certain elements or actions that you stress for beginning documentarians, like starting out fresh, like kind of a perspective you try to impart on them?
One thing that I can't remember who I learned this from exactly, but one thing that I always tell other people is to like journal, to write about whatever it is that you're like want to make a film about or are making a film about. And because you don't know what's going to come up personally. And I think that anytime you can come from a place of personal perspective, like why am I interested in this? Why am I the one to make this movie? Why, what, like you said, what perspective am I going to bring to it? And so when you journal or write about it, it automatically starts to become personal. It's like you're diarying, even about a subject that like isn't necessarily personal to you, but you never know what will come up. And so that's one thing that I tell people to do.
That's a really great idea, actually. I haven't heard somebody mention that before. Yeah, I like that.
I'm curious if you used that method when you were doing Sirens, or was it just the conversations that sparked with Lilas that sparked a personal connection?
Yeah, I mean, well, there already was such a foundation of personal connection for me in this film. But I did, along the way, absolutely. I mean, anytime I wake up in the middle, I mean, I don't think I slept for 3 years, like wake up in the middle of the night with a paper and pen next to my bed and just write down like just thoughts and feelings about it and themes and, just little moments that I loved. I mean, I just have lists, and yeah, I mean, I all along, and I'll do it for every movie I make, probably.
So Sirens showed at Sundance 2022, although the in-person version had to be canceled. Were you able to get any sense of how the film was received in the online setting?
Yeah, I mean, well, through word of mouth. I mean, people reaching out to me, the response was, overwhelming and beautiful. But also reviews, the reviews are really good. We got a lot of amazing reviews, and people just really connect to the film. People that I didn't even expect, the types of people I guess I didn't expect to connect to the film, reach out to me all the time, on a daily basis. And they're like, your film really, affected me. And so I've been overwhelmed with the reception of it so far.
And are you journaling about something else now, or is there a new film?
There's a couple. I have a couple ideas, a couple things in development. So I'm really excited to sink my teeth into something coming up.
Well, thank you so much for being with us on Civ Speaks. We really, really love the film and so great talking with you about it.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've been talking with director, producer, and cinematographer Rita Baghdadi about her documentary, Sirens. You can see it as part of CIF 46 Streams, which runs online April 10th through the 17th. You can also find out more about what's happening at the film festival by logging on to clevelandfilm.org. I'm Dee Perry.
And I'm Aaron Spears.
And we'd like to thank our sponsor for this podcast, Wayside Furniture, keeping it local since 1937. And thank you for listening to CIF Speaks.